we're bringing together some of the brightest minds in finance and economics to answer questions about the new normal of work. Everything from which jobs are going extinct to what the future workplace will even look like in a post-pandemic world. In this episode, we'll be speaking with Zandi. He's the chief economist at Moody's Analytics. So what does the workplace look like once the workforce is vaccinated?
Well, it'll start getting back to the office. I think probably later this summer, after July 4th would be my guess. We'll be close to herd immunity at that point, and I think businesses will feel comfortable welcoming their employees back. But I don't think there's any way we're going to go completely back. I mean, let me give you a statistic. Prior to the pandemic, just under 10% of the workforce worked from their home on a consistent basis. That's data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Last April, that was in the teeth of the business shutdowns. 35% of people were working from home consistently. Obviously, I'm rounding. So if you told me, late this year, after everything kind of reopens, we're back down to 15-20% of the workforce working from home, that sounds about right to me. And then going forward, I expect businesses will figure out how to empower work from anywhere, and we'll see the share of the workforce working from home increase steadily over time. So it'll swing back a bit, as the pandemic winds down, but we're not going back to where we were. And I think work from anywhere is a fundamental shift. It's not temporary.
Employers are legally allowed to fire employees if they refuse to get the vaccine, but do you think any of them will actually go through with it?
I think some employers will put pressure on employees and suggest that, strongly that they need that for their own protection and the protection of their own colleagues. And that pressure will also lead to increased vaccinations over time. So, it's an issue now, maybe an issue, 3-6 months from now, but a year from now, I suspect this isn't going to be that big an issue.
How is commercial real estate adapting to the post-COVID world? Do you think we're done with the days of the big, flashy city headquarters?
Now, there is a reasonable debate. I haven't quite figured it out in my own mind about space per employee. So, for example, are workers going to be nervous about working in close quarters with their colleagues? Prior to the pandemic, there was this move to bringing everyone into kind of a common area, having them working together in kind of a bullpen kind of area, because the thought was this improves collaboration and communication and generates new ideas and innovation. And we may not feel the same way about that, post-pandemic. Particularly if there's another pandemic. I think that would totally change people's, feelings about, what kind of space they want when they go to work. One of our biggest problems pre-pandemic was productivity growth was very weak. It was 1% per annum, which is half of what we've been experiencing through most of the post-World War II period. And so if we continued on that path, that means, our standard of living would be significantly diminished over time. So the question is, on the other side of the pandemic, are we going to go back to that 1% world of very slow productivity growth that we felt like we were trapped in? Or are we going to go to something bigger and better than that because of this learning curve we just went up because of the pandemic? We all, literally went immediately up a mass learning curve to use these new technologies online. Businesses incorporated new business practices. Does that mean that we're going to be able to generate stronger productivity growth in the future than we have in the recent past? That's a very significant question, very big question, and a very important question for all of us.
How long will it take the economy to fully recover, and what will the shape of that recovery look like?
Suppose by the early 23, we're back to full employment. That means it'll have taken, roughly 3 years, a little over 3 years to get back come back full circle from the pandemic. Think back to after the financial crisis. It took 10 years. And after the 2000 downturn, the bursting of the Y2K bubble, that took us 6 or 7 years. And if you go back to the 1990 recession, the S&L crisis, that took 6 or 7 years. So by the standards of recoveries that we've experienced in recent decades, this is going to be a V.
So on that point, how will our economy fundamentally shift if a significant number of employees continue to work from home for the next several years or even indefinitely?
Well, I think it's a positive. I think it's good for the employees. They're obviously making a choice, and they're taking advantage of, lower cost of living, cheaper housing, lower taxes, shorter commutes. So they're going to be happier. I think employers will figure it out as well. I mean, there's some, adjustment pains here. People have to figure out how to adjust. And there's some niggling HR issues, human resource issues. Like, for example, say I worked in New York and decided now I want to work in Vero Beach, Florida. I don't want to go back to New York. I can do my job here, no problem. I can catch a plane from Orlando or for Palm Beach, get to anywhere I need to go. I'm on the computer all the time anyway. But if I'm living in Vero Beach, should I get New York wages or should I get Vero Beach wages? The answer is probably Vero Beach wages, but that's going to be a trick to get from here to there. So businesses will figure it out and they'll adjust, but it'll take a little bit of time.
What are the tax implications of a remote workforce, and what does that do to cities and social services?
Yeah, it's going to be a problem for cities that lose people, right? I mean, I lived in New York, worked in New York, and now I'm going to live and work in Florida. And obviously, one of the reasons I'm doing that is for the lower taxes. Florida doesn't have an income tax. New York has a pretty high income tax for particularly high income workers. So the tax base will suffer in New York as a result. Property taxes will be affected. If people are moving, then the value of, we talked about commercial real estate, the value of commercial real estate properties will be lower. The value of housing will be lower, certainly not increase as much as it has historically. And so that affects property taxes, which are key to local government.
Mm-hmm. Are we further fomenting the class divide by separating those who can work from home forever from those who can't?
Well, I mean, obviously the pandemic was very hard on low income, low wealth households. Higher income, high wealth households did very, very well, in part because, a significant part because high income, high wealth households in many cases could work from anywhere. They weren't deemed essential workers. They didn't have to go out and man the hospitals and the grocery stores and make sure that the country operated. So high income households benefited from that. They never lost their jobs. They could continue to work from home. Good health care. Own a home, own stocks, and of course we've seen stock prices and housing values go skyward, and so they're wealthier, much wealthier today than they were on prior to the pandemic. And then conversely, low-income, lesser skilled workers, minority groups in particular, came into the pandemic probably not owning any stock, lucky to own a home, healthcare, a question mark. And of course, those are the folks that lost their jobs in the pandemic, or if not, they didn't lose their jobs, they got their hours cut or their wages cut. So, they got completely hammered. So I think the pandemic put into very clear relief, this wide gulf. We all knew about it prior to the pandemic. We knew this was a problem. It was becoming more of an issue. It was even becoming a macroeconomic issue. But the pandemic just made it very, very stark, very, very clear. And obvious that we have to do something about it if we want to have an economy that's going to flourish going forward.
What should a living wage be in the U.S.? And should we be looking at UBI after a year of all these stimulus payments?
A working family, somebody who's working, a typical family, a couple of kids, let's say a 4-person family, a living wage is at the very least that they're not living below the poverty line. The American Rescue Plan, like the child tax credit, for example, really will put a floor under the income of families, in this case with children. And I do think some of the other social support efforts that are going to be implemented into law as part of the next fiscal package, things around healthcare and housing and education and childcare and elder care will ensure that there's a higher level of basic, let's call it income, for people to live on.
Switching topics, we've seen women fall out of the workforce at a higher rate because of the child care crisis in the past year. Do you see this trend persisting post-COVID? Do you think the government should be stepping in to do something about it?
I think it will be very different post-COVID. So, once schools open, and it feels like that's starting to happen in many parts of the country, we will see many women come back into the workforce. I mean, a lot of the exit of women out of the workforce during the pandemic was to take care of kids because kids couldn't go to school, couldn't go in person. Well, now that they can go back, I think we're going to see those moms go back to work. And actually, it's a lot of dads, too. If you think about all the policies that are being implemented as part of the American Rescue Plan or what's coming down the road, a lot of it is centered around trying to make it easier for women to go to work. So I think there's a very strong effort by the administration and this Congress to provide the kind of support, financial support that's necessary to allow women to go back into the workforce and stay in the workforce for longer.
Because of the pandemic, which industries or jobs do you think will be extinct in the next 5 years?
Well, I think anything related to travel is gonna have a struggle. You're gonna have to adjust and adapt. Particularly business travel. Tourism, particularly domestic tourism, will find its way back pretty quickly. People as they, feel comfortable that the pandemic is in the rearview mirror, they're gonna want to go out and travel. But global tourism, that's going to take a bit of time, because while the U.S. is going to achieve herd immunity quickly, probably sometime in the summer, the rest of the world, it could take 2, 3, 4 years, particularly the emerging world. So tourism will find its way back, although it'll take a bit of time. Business travel, I don't see that coming back, at least not the way it was prior to the pandemic. I mean, I can take my own personal experience. I have a couple hundred economists that report to me all around the world, and after our compensation and rent, business travel expense was our third highest expense. And, that went to zero in 2020.
What do you think are the next wave of companies that are poised to succeed in a post-pandemic world? Like, is the enterprise and B2B space, for example, about to get a lot more interesting?
Well, I'll tell you, one part of the economy that's going to really take off here is manufacturing, I think. Manufacturing, industrials, transportation, the good side of the economy is going to really get a lift, in part because global supply chains that had been lengthened across the globe prior to the pandemic are now disrupted, a bit mangled. They're going to be resurrected, and they're going to be brought in closer to home, and a lot more activity is going to be brought home, particularly those types of activities that are key to national security, or things like pharmaceuticals and chips and sophisticated instrumentation, the materials, that kind of thing. I think because we're going to get a very large, in all likelihood, infrastructure package later this year, a lot of that is going to go to roads and bridges and water systems and 5G and broadband and green technologies, new EV vehicles. That's all manufactured goods and products, and so that's going to create a lot of demand. I suspect post-pandemic, the manufacturing, industrial, transportation side, the good side of the economy, is really the side of the economy that's going to benefit, quite significantly from all that's transpired.